Breast milk or bottle feeding is what I'd like to talk about. There was a great article that came on a show that I like called Living on Earth. LOE.org is the website, and it's a radio show that airs on Sundays on NPR in Boston, Massachusetts. This is the July 27th show. The title of this segment is "The U.S. Tries to Boost Infant Formula." The introduction of the show was, breastfeeding came under fire at the World Health Assembly meeting in Geneva this past spring of 2018. The U.S. delegation mounted an opposition to proposed breastfeeding regulations that would encourage nations to limit the use of infant formulas and milk substitutes. Director of the Infant Feeding Action Coalition in Canada, Elizabeth Sturken, talks with the host Bobby Bascom on LOE.org, Living on Earth, about the benefits of breastfeeding and the risks of aggressive infant formula marketing. What they're going to get to here in a minute or two is they're not saying don't have any formula. That's not the point here. What they're saying is the aggressive marketing is inappropriate. And when you compare the effectiveness of breast milk and breastfed babies to infant formula and formula-fed babies, you'll see a significant difference in health outcomes. So what they're going to suggest here is enhancing or encouraging women to breastfeed when they can is the best thing to do, and then have formula as a reasonable backup when necessary is fine, as opposed to be marketed as an equal product or a superior product. That's what they're really thumbs down on, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. The introduction by Bobby Bascom is, when it comes to breastfeeding newborn babies, the science is settled. When possible, breast is best. Breast milk has a myriad of health benefits that formula simply can't rival. That became clear in the 1970s. We're talking decades of having this issue here, when Nestle began to aggressively market formula in developing countries and ran ads implying it was just as good as breast milk. Breast milk provides nursing babies with antibodies to protect from some infectious diseases like malaria. Denied that protection, as many as 1.5 million formula-fed babies died across the developing world. Now, in the developing world, breastfeeding was almost 100%. So that's when this started to be marketed and the breastfeeding rate went down. Alarmed about Nestle's advertising ultimately led to the International Code of Marketing Breast Milk Substitutes in 1981. Thanks to Living on Earth, I didn't even know that happened in 1981, but it's a good thing that it did happen. It was a resolution, a resolution to strengthen the code was expected to easily pass at this recent meeting of the World Health Assembly in the spring of 2018, but the U.S. delegation shocked participants by opposing it. Elizabeth Sturken is now interviewed. So how did you become interested in breastfeed? The host asked Elizabeth Sturken. She worked in Nigeria. She firsthand saw the devastation of formula feeding in a developing country where the water is not potable for mixing formula and where cost is prohibitive because it's more expensive to do the formula feeding, and where it's just very deadly to be formula feeding. Deadly, she says, and they call it baby bottle syndrome. So that is an issue where babies are literally dying because the water that they're mixing with the formula was bad, but we'll get into more of the issues later. We don't have quite that many water issues here, but there's still issues. Bascom said, recently the World Health Organization met in Geneva, Switzerland. What happened? Sturken said this year Ecuador had led the new resolution, which included the new guidance on ending the inappropriate marketing of foods for infants and young children. However, when the Trump administration got wind of it, they began to threaten the Ecuadorian government with economic sanctions. And so Ecuador was forced to drop the lead on this proposed resolution. Boy, that strong-arm type of influence, it sounds really inappropriate to me. Maybe it does to you. Subsequently, the Russian Federation took up the lead and the other countries continued to support this particular resolution. Good for you. This was about trying to regulate inappropriate marketing of formula. What does that mean? Misleading advertising made about the formula rather than warnings. You've got increased diarrheal rates, increased respiratory disease rates, increased rates of obesity, cardiovascular disease, and various other long-term consequences from bottle feeding, from formula. Formula feeding has not only the short-term consequences of infectious diseases, but also the long-term consequences for human health. That sounds pretty serious. And don't forget, Robert Lustig, who I had told you in the past to watch his TED Talk. Robert Lustig has said in his book Fat Chance and on other sources, he said, formula is basically a milkshake for babies, a milkshake for babies. Look at the ingredients sometime and you'll shock yourself at what's in it. Okay. What is the U.S. motivation for trying to water down promoting breast milk at the WHO meeting? We really see the marketing of breast milk substitutes as being in direct competition with mother's milk. The more formula get into a baby's stomach, the bigger profits. A $70 billion market annually. Now, what they're saying is not to restrict access to formula. That's not what they're saying here. Access is not a problem, says Sturkin. The products will be available in pharmacies and supermarkets globally. The International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes does not restrict access. It restricts the marketing and promotion of the products. If you are living in poverty and suffering from malnutrition, it's an incredibly costly way to feed your infants. I think this is the crux of it now. This is the really important piece of this. If the mother is malnourished, you want to support the mother nutritionally so that she can feed her baby. Wouldn't that be the most wonderful thing to do, to support that mother, to support the infant, to support the health and wellness of that developing child, to support nature and the way it's supposed to work? The Lancet estimates that roughly 820,000 lives will be saved when breastfeeding becomes optimal. So the death rate associated with artificial feeding, with formula feeding in the developing world, is disastrous. Okay, so they're not pulling any punches here. This is very important stuff. Sturkin says, why is breastfeeding the best option for babies? First of all, we know that IQ levels are higher when you breastfeed. There are less neurological problems. There are far fewer deaths related to diarrheal diseases and upper respiratory diseases. The long-term outcomes of cancers, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, the non-communicable diseases are much lower in the breastfed population. And breastfeeding is part of the normal reproductive system that creates this very special relationship between a mother and her infant and young child. And of course, these things that you can never reproduce and put in a tin can. Great summary. The World Health Organization guidelines suggest that babies be breastfed for 2 years or beyond. Now, in the very rare circumstances that a mother cannot produce any breast milk at all, or not enough breast milk, and you're in the United States, what do? I believe the first option that a woman should consider seeking out is a wet nurse, is seeking out a woman that is producing more breast milk than she needs. And of course, there are milk banks, right? And just a quick search before I came in to do the show. massbirth.com is one site that you can look at, and milkbankne.org, meaning Milk Bank New England. Those are sources where women donate their breast milk so other people can use it. It sounds a little weird for some women to say, well, that's kind of icky. I don't want to get my breast milk from another woman. But if you think about it, we think it's reasonable to go get this package in a store that comes from a factory that we don't know where it is. We don't know where the ingredients are coming from. You don't know the people that are making it. You don't know the company and their safety standards. And you probably haven't even taken the time to read all the ingredients and look at that. Another option that I could suggest, if you won't do the milk bank or wet nurse, is to consider looking at how to make your own formula at home. And if you look at it, there are other really smart people, not myself, really other smart people that have listed all the things that are in there. And if you, again, look at a package of formula, you can see that the ingredients are fairly basic, and you could cover that by making your own. There's some suggestions. So, of course, breastfeeding is best. I'm Dr. Scott Fuller.